Here it is, episode number 5 of the Stick to F1 podcast. Anthony Mingioni, Jason Myrtetus. We've got a couple guests that are going to join us momentarily, Lee Mather and PJ Tierney. And we talked about it in the last episode, and I can't wait to talk to these two guys. Lee from Codemasters and big part of the F1 2020-2021 now campaign with the new game that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. So we're going to talk to them about that, about F1, about all kinds of stuff, and the cross-pollination of Formula One as a sport and the gaming community, which is, I think, fascinating. So we're going to have them in just a minute. But first of all, how you doing?
We're doing okay here. I'm excited to look at we're looking at the back end of a triple header. I think we've had more racing in the last stretch in quite some time, and pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because one of the elements, this is the third leg of the triple header. There's 2 triple headers, I believe, this season. Mm-hmm. And then you only have 2 weeks to Silverstone. And a sprint race.
We're adding the sprint race to the mix, and I think the news was just that it is official. The sprint race at Silverstone will determine pole position. Yeah. That was confirmed by Ross Brawn shortly, just a little while ago. So yeah.
Well, the other part of this too is we just finished the first third of the season. And now it's the second third, and it's been so compelling, and they're back at Austria again this week for the Austrian Grand Prix. Styrian last week, we know how that finished. We recapped it. We had the race this week, and then Silverstone, and you're getting close to the summer break. Turkey's back on the calendar because Singapore's not. I mean, there's so much going on. Any headlines that are jumping out at you that you feel like we should discuss before looking at kind of this race this weekend?
Again, the first thing is, going into this race, we know that Pirelli's going to be providing the new compounds for this race officially. Yep. Going to be more on the soft, so we'll see how much that's going to play. We know that Red Bull, the parts that I believe Max Verstappen had used last week, will also now be on Perez's car as well. So we're going to need to obviously keep an eye out for that with regards to Red Bull. The other major thing, again, going back to I'm going to be fascinated to see how the whole sprint thing is going to happen, because we've had both ways on this. People who, obviously, you're not on board with the sprint being a determining factor for a race, but I think it's going to be talked about a lot over the next several weeks for sure.
Oh yeah.
So, and also we're going to see again. I know about the race between McLaren and Ferrari right now. For third, that's a good decent pitch battle we got going on right there. There's still some play there. So these are some of the things I would say I'll be looking at the most right now overall.
Yeah, what's interesting too? Mm-hmm. We had that pause, obviously, when F1's at Australia in 2020, mm-hmm. and then the season gets just shut down, and they eventually come back at the Red Bull Ring last year with 2. There's been 26 races in 52 weeks in the calendar year.
Yeah, that's a pretty intensive schedule when you really get down to it. That's pretty, yeah. It's incredibly intensive. Basically one every other week since the calendar year started. So
yeah. One of the other things as we start to preview this weekend is they're calling for some pretty unpredictable weather.
Yes.
And that could add just a whole nother element to this. We've seen some damp conditions so far. A little bit of rain at Imola.
It was enough that it messed up things a little bit for that race for some of the drivers, for sure, at Imola.
Well, for Hamilton, it did. Lewis Hamilton, he tries to make that pass off the racing line and ends up, in the gravel, then can't find reverse, damages the wing into the wall, but then Bottas and Russell crashed, and it bailed him out, and he didn't get any pain. He ends up with a second-place finish there. That was a huge mistake that he kind of really mitigated the damage to because his teammate got wrecked.
Exactly, and it was actually a smart maneuver. I remember watching that and saying, I remember Martin Brundle mentioning, he's treating this like a front-wheel drive car, and it was quick thinking on Hamilton's part to get himself back into that race when that occurred. So, again, it's just a credit for why Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest of all time. He thought quickly and was on his feet. Others might have been completely wiped out, and the race would have been over for them. Yeah. Not for him.
He backed out over the tire tracks with which he went in and did it very slowly and methodically. We say that in sports all the time. Great players, they play the game where it's not fast in their head. They play it slow. The game is slowed down to them. So they can make those little minute, nuanced maneuvers or plays because it's slower in their head. It's not hyper speed for them. That was a prime example of that in Formula One with Lewis Hamilton, having the wherewithal and the mind to go, okay, calm down a second. Let me figure out how to get out of this without a DNF, without disqualifying from this Grand Prix. And he did exactly that. And he ends up capturing second place points as a result. Crazy.
Exactly. And again, he's had it's been a fascinating season for Lewis, I would say. I mean, certainly we all saw what happened at Baku. He went from potentially winning that race, if he gets the jump just right, to finishing out of the points. So he's had kind of a balance of things. It's been an interesting year. Lewis going into this thing, I remember last year talking about how, he would love to be challenged. Well, he's gotten his wish in spades this year. I really, between his team trying to get themselves back into this thing, and this race again becomes fairly critical. I really, they're close. It's close enough. It's not that Verstappen's lead is insurmountable, but they get to 5 straight wins. I believe that'll be the first time. I think the number was the first time since 2005. So it's been 16 years that one team's been able to claim that many victories in a row. It gets tough. It gets really tough for Mercedes at that point to overcome that. So it's going to be really interesting to see this weekend for sure.
Yeah, that's incredible, because you think of the dominance of the Mercs in the turbo hybrid era, and that hasn't been done. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing to me. And Red Bull's got an opportunity this weekend on a track that they just dominated. And I'm seeing a lot of conversation about Mercedes has got to develop the W12 car, or they shouldn't ask themselves the question why they're not winning races unless they put some development into this car.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting week in terms of what was originally communicated from Toto Wolff. And then we get reports that there are some parts that are going to be coming in. So is it Toto playing a little bit of gamesmanship on his part? Was there Toto doesn't strike me as the type to not know pretty much everything that's going on right now, and his communication with headquarters. Certainly, I think there was maybe a little bit of gamesmanship involved. Maybe he was goosing Mercedes to the higher ups that, hey, we need maybe a few things for this car right now. I do kind of wonder whether or not it was sort of almost like coded language, so to speak. But how much that's going to mitigate the straight line advantage on a track that has 3 straights on it, the way the Red Bull Ring does.
Yeah, 3 DRS straights. Wow.
Again, they are at the point right now where I do think, again, Verstappen won an absolutely perfect race. We saw the power ratings. It was like 9.8 out of 10. I mean, literally, he had that race in a rock. It was like a pitcher, having batters in the palm of his hand, basically, through a performance. He had him in a rocking chair that race.
Yeah.
And that's how it was. And they have to hope that does not repeat itself again this weekend.
Yeah, when you have that power advantage they have on the straights, and the savviness and the maturity of the driver, and if tire degradation does become a factor, when you have speed in hand, you can look after your tires in such a different way. And
might be a concern this weekend again, because it is cooler. They are talking about cooler weather this weekend. There's some talk of that, so it's something we do have to keep an eye out for.
Real quick too, there's reports now that Sergio Perez is eyeing up a new contract with Red Bull at this time, and that Hamilton has already begun talks with a new contract with Mercedes. So that's pretty interesting that's starting to kind of become public now. I always thought that was one of the fascinating things about Formula One, is that you have guys signing with other teams while they still have 10 races to go with the team they're with. I thought that was odd.
I mean, or you have a team basically telling a driver that they're not gonna have their contract renewed, and especially we saw that last year with Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari, and what a weird situation that puts you in as a team and as a driver. Yeah. I know Lewis said this time he wants this thing to get done sooner than it was for the because it went into the winter this year. He wants to drive. Yeah, it went into January, which again was fascinating to watch. I don't think we ever thought that he wasn't going to be re-upping with Mercedes, but it's still, as long as he didn't have pen to paper, you still had to wonder. So I know he said that it's been very low key. It's been sort of it's been a conversation, more conversation. But it sounds like they have some ideas that he wants to get this done before we get past sometime in August. It's what it seems that's the target right now.
Yeah, the 3-week summer break.
Yeah, now Perez is going to be interesting, and I'm kind of giving thought of this, and all depends in many ways. And he's got a 1 year, as we all know, he's on a 1 year deal with Red Bull. He has done, in my mind, nothing to not earn a new contract. He has been, I think, one of the biggest reasons beyond the car this season is that Red Bull is now able to consistently put pressure with two cars, something they haven't been able to do, honestly, since it was Danny Ricciardo and Max Verstappen a few years back. It's been a while that has been something they've been able to do on a consistent basis. Gasly, but again, Pierre Gasly he wants to keep himself in consideration, obviously, for the seat. And I think they're kind of sort of playing things sort of by ear right now. But as of right now, I would say Perez would likely have the upper hand on a new contract. And then it makes things very interesting potentially for Gasly. But to me, it would be between those two, because Gasly has made it known that he definitely feels like he's deserving. He's earning and deserving of being back in that seat again.
Yeah.
But I like the dynamic there. I really do like the dynamic between Verstappen and Perez. I really do.
It's not easy to be the teammate of a driver like Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton, because the title pushes on the driver championship. It is about the constructors too, and there's that's where the money's at, right? But it's not easy to be that guy. And the relationship between Max and Sergio seems very strong. It's still early, but it does seem pretty strong, and I think that's an element of it as well. You saw Max when he got knocked out at Baku, how he responded and was out there at the podium presentation, and I read some articles about it, just how they get along, and it seems like that's all good. So that's a good thing. We'll see if. I mean, not to say
it's
that
year
Hamilton
one too, Jace. What I'll say is it is the first year. So again, you're talking about Sergio Perez is certainly very grateful. Everybody saw, for those who've watched Drive to Survive, the penultimate episode when he won at Sakir, and how I'm great. Everything is all the power of editing, but it was very obvious that he thought he was going to be out of Formula One, Sergio.
Yeah.
And I think he's very grateful to Red Bull for the opportunity. He's taken full advantage of the opportunity given to him, right? That was afforded to him. But we all know that he has a ton of racecraft. He has a ton of experience. That's invaluable. He's one of the best. We call it, the tire whisperer. Yep. He has earned, in my mind, he has absolutely earned that contract. But I do feel like Red Bull's still keeping things semi-close to the vest with regards to, what they're willing to do. And I'm hoping, rooting for him to get that multi-year deal. Maybe it happens, and maybe that occurs. And we know the conversation's going on, so I think it's most likely that it will happen.
Yeah, he's a guy that goes from being out, almost thinking he's out of Formula One without a seat, to driving for Red Bull with, podium is, the target every week in that car. And then, because when he leaves Red Bull, he's going to go right to another seat as a result of it. It's like the double parachute. It's, okay, I'll go to Red Bull. Let's see how long I stay there. And then when my time is up at Red Bull, whenever that is, 1 year, 3 years, I'm going to get another seat as a result of what I did at Red Bull. It's perfect.
Exactly. But again, we all know, the performance has to be consistent. Like, we don't know going into that. We don't know at the moment what the situation will be for Valtteri Bottas. He's had a very successful run, has won races at Mercedes. What the dynamic of the relationship is. I mean, Lewis Hamilton speaks very highly about Valtteri Bottas, but we are still sort of in a weird spot right now for Mercedes. And the teammate dynamic can shift from season to season. It's great now, but the next year you get a bit more, Sergio may start feeling a bit more. I mean, he's already ambitious to begin with. He's already said, I want to be a world champion. And nobody, obviously, if you're going to be in the sport, wants to do that. But I think if he has that taste of that, they're going to have to eventually deal with that dynamic.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Good point. Yeah. All right, let's do our pick the podium before we get to Lee Mather and to PJ Tierney. You're up, actually. I'm picking first. I'm up in the Constructors' Championship here, 13-9 through the first two races that we started the podcast. So, who's your pick the podium this week for the Austrian Grand Prix?
I'm having this funny feeling right now. We're gonna have some weird weather. I may be wrong on this. I almost feel like I don't want to keep going chalk every single week with with the numbers 1 and 2. So, I'm gonna actually pick. I'm going to say at the very top, and just to get himself back into the championship race talk here, I'm going to say Hamilton's going to win this race. comes in second. And I really like the pace that Carlos Sainz had in for Ferrari. I know they're poo-pooing the track and saying things. I know Binotto has been sort of like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it, but I really like what I saw out of Sainz this week. So I'm gonna say that Max, something happens where Max, he hasn't had, he's been a few weeks before a DNF, but I don't know. I'm gonna say there's something that unexpected happens. That's my podium: Hamilton, Norris, and Carlos Sainz.
Okay, mine's a little different. I'm gonna say that Max wins it again because I think if Rain comes in, he's just such a good driver.
Okay.
I have Max winning the race. I have Charles Leclerc.
Oh, Leclerc.
As Crofty likes to call him, Charles Leclerc, finishing second in this race because I thought he was awesome in that. There were some not so awesome moments. Running into guys on the straight, can't do, Leclerc.
No.
But
clean that up.
Yeah, you got to clean that up. I have him coming in second in this race. So I got Verstappen, Leclerc, and I have Bottas finishing third. And I think that Hamilton, I think this pressure is going to get to him. I think it's getting to him, but I think he's going to try and do too much here in this race because this is now, I mean, you're looking at a lot of races that he has not won right now. Yeah. It's been a while since Lewis Hamilton's won a race. So your way of thinking is probably the way I should go, that he's going to win the race because he's a winner, and he's the best ever.
But you're right. There's pressure involved. And again, I vacillated back and forth on how I wanted to do this. And I really looked at it to myself, Jason. I said, when you don't expect a surprise, you think things are going to be chalk. That's when things automatically go in a direction you don't expect.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm going to go.
Sebastian Vettel's going to win a race this year.
Of course.
Yeah.
Or Stroll. Stroll finally win a race.
I'm not getting that crazy. Not yet. but the other thing too, like I look at the past years where Lewis has been challenged or been trailing in the points. He still knew in those years he had a superior race car. This time it's different because while he's trailing in the points, now he also knows through 8 races he does not have the superior race car at any track they've gone to so far for the most part.
Right. He's going to have to win.
Not to bring it out.
The team has to be on point. They have to be ready to go. It's tough to beat out Red Bull's speed, especially coming out of the pits. Make no mistake about it. The pits, we can talk about Verstappen, we can talk about Perez, we can talk about the car. The Red Bull pit crew, you better include in that conversation for why that team's out in front the way it is.
Totally agree. Oddly enough, the pit crew hurt Sergio a little bit last weekend.
A little bit, and yet he figured out a way though, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
As I think, what was it? The horse said he drove the wheels off the car after that happened.
Well, we shall see what happens this week at the Red Bull Ring. But let's get to our first feature interview with Lee Mather and PJ Tierney. Ant and I had a chance to catch up with them. Here is the conversation. So excited to have join us on this episode of the Stick to F1 podcast. Our first guests, plural, Lee Mather from Codemasters and PJ Tierney. I'm fans of both. I love the game. I've talked about the game. Anthony Mingioni with us as well. And guys, thanks for joining us because I'm so excited to talk to you guys.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, good to have you around. Good to have you around. Good to see that you're big fans of F1 and the game as well. All pretty cool stuff.
Look, I think that the two things intersect incredibly because I fell in love with F1. We're doing this podcast. We're just some hockey guys, right? We love it. And the game has helped me understand the sport to a tremendous level. Like, Lee, let me ask you this question because are you seeing that like in your research as a company that intersection is there because there's so many scientific elements to F1 and the game incorporates those? I think it just helps you become a bigger fan of the sport and the sport helps you become a bigger fan of the game. They feed each other.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've always known that there's a very broad demographic for a Formula One racing game in that you've got people who are racing game fans, but not necessarily Formula One fans. And then you've got people who are big Formula One fans, but not necessarily big gamers. And I think over the last sort of 5-6 years, we've really seen the game bridge that gap. And also the age gap as well, because Formula One fans traditionally have been slightly more mature, but they're starting to get younger and younger now. The sport's shifting up a gear. The sort of coverage that Liberty have been putting out has been a lot more social savvy. So I think that the whole sort of Formula One space has, come together with gaming really effectively over the last few years. Maybe sort of 5-10 years ago, it was very much a on TV sport, and that was the older generation who watched it. But now it's really bridging the gap. And as you say, the game's done a great job of educating people. Drive to Survive's really drawn attention to the sport, and people who had very little interest before are now equally as obsessed as we are.
This question's for both of you. Where did your love for motorsports begin, and how young?
I started back growing up in Ireland in 1996 was my first season of watching. So it was the kind of thing where I was like about 9 or 10 years old around that time, and I would, my family would get the newspaper in every Sunday. I read the newspaper, read the sports. So I read from the back page first, and then go to the front. So I was following all the football and the soccer and stuff like that. But there was always this little like half-page thing about Formula One, and I was like, what the hell is Formula One? And there's an Irish team in it, which was Jordan at the time, which is now Aston Martin, but through long chain of different things. But you had an Irish team, you had an Irish driver in the Ferrari, in Eddie Irvine, and I'd see a couple of clips on the news and stuff like that. And then my first race that I actually sat down to watch live properly was Australia 96. So I remember getting up in the morning for it, and the first thing we see, because the first thing we see in that race is it was Martin Brundle in the Jordan going upside down through turn 3.
Oh gosh.
Through the third turn.
I am hooked.
Yeah. And he hops out of the car, and I'm like, holy, he survived that. These cars are amazing. And then obviously, you've got the sound, and you've got the drivers, you've got Schumacher was the legend, he was my hero, and all that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of followed on from there. And then over time, it became like video games got me more and more into both motorsport and Formula One in general. Like, for example, I played the old F1 games, I played some other titles, and now I'm playing new F1 games and playing a bit of rally on the side. And now I'm sitting in a sim rig at the moment. I've got my own handbrake and all that. So it comes full circle, and it's good. It's a good thing.
What about you, Lee?
Yeah, I think I came into it a slightly different way, because from a very, very early age, I was just car obsessed. It was always cars, and my mum always tells stories of me walking through car parks to random strangers and just telling them what car my granddad would drive or what car my parents had got, and I would know every car on the road intimately, and I'd get all the magazines and pick out the stats, and I'd crave all the information about cars. And then as games came along, I remember my uncle had a ColecoVision, a very old console now. I mean, if anybody remembers the Coleco.
Oh, I remember those. I remember that.
Awesome. I mean, it's still in my loft. And because we bought one, and he actually had a steering wheel for it in a game called Turbo. And I remember playing that, and I was absolutely hooked. And then it was probably a case of sort of the early motorsport I would have been into, more or less, would have been sort of the British touring cars, or even the rally back in the day. I still love watching the old VHS rallies on YouTube. There's such fond memories of that. And then Formula One, I remember going to watch test days, because obviously going to the races was prohibitive as a child at that point. It was expensive. So I used to go with a friend, and we'd go and watch the test days at Silverstone, which you could just go along and watch. And we'd wait, and we'd get the autographs from the drivers. And I think that's sort of what's bred my interest in Formula One. And obviously, you probably don't recognize my accent, but where I'm from regionally is sort of very near to the home of Nigel Mansell. And obviously, he was such an iconic driver in Formula One that,
So he's a local hero that's there as well.
Relatively local, yes.
Let me ask you, I've said this on numerous occasions to people, that I think other sports, especially in North America, should take a page out of F1 and the gaming community. Because I think what F1 does with onboards, giving you that experiential feel, because everybody wants to experience sports. We're all voyeurs. We all want to feel like what it feels like to be in the locker room, on the field of play, like helmet cam footage and stuff like that. But this Formula One relates itself so well with that camera that's just above the driver's head to give you that feel, the wing cameras, the rear camera of the wing, and all of those things. And in the game, too, the ability with YouTube to put out these videos of video game play to help learn how to be better, how to handle situations, and to immerse yourself in the sport. The way that Formula One and the gaming community through this game, to me, has kind of sunken its hooks into the fans is something that I think that all other sports need to look at. I really do, because I think it's the thing that brought me in. And I'm a 49-year-old guy. I'm not the target demo. I'm not a gamer. My son says, I have his old Xbox. That's what I use. And he said, you got to get other games. I go, I don't want other games. I'm not a gamer. I want to drive. I want to drive a Formula One car. This is the best I can do. What do you want from me? I can't go buy a McLaren, all right? I'm not going to get a Lambo. So, I mean, talk about that element of it, because like you guys are doing this for a living. And I always said, I work in hockey. If you're doing something you love, you don't work a day in your life. Does it feel like that to you, Lee?
Yeah, definitely.
Even though that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that making video games isn't easy. It's a very time-consuming and pressured job. But majority of people do it because they love it. We got into the industry in the first place because we loved it. I mean, when I got into the games industry, it was still relatively young. I was 16 years old. I'm now in my mid-40s. So it wasn't even seen back then as a proper career. My parents were like, that's not a job. You can't do that. Yeah, exactly. And the industry's now worth more than the movie industry, so video games have become enormous. And you talk about like the way that, you've interacted with it and the way that it's presented, that's evolved massively, as how everybody consumes media has changed so massively.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much better access to these things. So they've got to find ways to present it in a more engaging and exciting way, because just showing a race isn't going to cut it these days. People have got access to so many other forms of media. And that's what they're great at feeding it with now. So you can watch the F1 extra stuff on YouTube, which is fantastic. And you talk about the camera angles. I mean, I've always been blown away by what they do in the IndyCar. When you get the camera on the top and it rotates round and it shows the cars as they go around each other. I mean, I always find that really exciting as well. But again, it's technologies pushing that access to the sports for the fans.
I think one of the
F1. Sorry, the F1 YouTube channel. Just to give credit to the sports YouTube channel, it's insane.
Yeah,
it is absolutely insane how much access you get on that. Like 2 hours after the race, before even the highlights are on television, you've got 5-minute highlights on YouTube. You've got the qualifying, you've got the pole position lap, you've got analysis, interviews, radio quotes, everything. It's almost like you're at the track. It is, and to think that F1 didn't really use its YouTube channel until I'd say 5 years ago, maybe something like that. It is absolutely mind-blowing how accessible they are making the sport towards new people. And obviously you've got the video game as well, so you can actually be an F1 driver, which is pretty awesome as well. And there's a super entrenched community there that is ultra passionate about the game. They buy the games every year. They have their own little niches within. You'll get some people that'll buy the game just to take photos and make them all look amazing and stuff like that. You'll get some that are there just for the competitive aspect, so they're only there to take part in league races and things like that. And some will come into F1 as a racing game, just as a racing game itself, and then learn about the sport afterwards, whereas others will come in from being a sports fan and then come into it as a game. And it's a really unique aspect, that whole thing. But social media and YouTube and all that kind of stuff, it's been a real massive boom for both the sport and the game. And now we're seeing the two of them come together. And shortly before we recorded this, F1 put up a video on YouTube where they had a few of the drivers in the paddock were revealing their ratings in the game and guessing what their teammates were. And it's incredible to think that that's the kind of thing that is possible these days. Like, you had, for example, not to spoil the whole video, but you had like George Russell and Nicholas Latifi were guessing each other's stats, and they were poking fun at each other, going, you only got an 85, you got a 99, you got a what, you got a and it's absolutely wild.
Lee, do you guys get when they get the ratings, the drivers? Do you get a bit of feedback from them and a little bit of some ribbing and about what they get at the start of the season?
So the drivers have been really good about it, to be honest. It's the community who really get on board with it, and they really do talk quite quite a lot about it. And we knew from the beginning, when we first set out to do my team, we'd need to rate drivers, and we knew how sensitive that would be, because anybody who's in that sort of position, you'd know yourself, wouldn't you, that you've got to be sensitive as to how somebody rates you. It's as simple as that. So we put a lot of time and effort into how we create those stats, and it's all generated through real data that we collect through those drivers' career histories. But that doesn't stop them from still not always agreeing. And as PJ said, I think the content they've put out based on those stats is very good, very funny.
I love that, because you almost want to say to them, I didn't create your rating. You have created your rating. We're using your data, your telemetry, all of those things. Like, I didn't do this. This is on you. If you're not great in the braking zone, then that's on you. That ain't on me. But I can imagine that it's like they think there's some kind of subjective element to it as well. Let me ask you about this, because while the pandemic has been very difficult all over the world, it also presented an opportunity, because we didn't have live sports for a long period of time because of this pandemic. And, I thought you guys were really smart in putting out, events of virtual races with Formula One drivers. And like Drive to Survive, I think, has driven a lot of people to the sport and to the game, I would imagine. I would imagine that did as well, because when you do have, George Russell is a frequent participant in doing races, as is Lando Norris and others. When that happens, I imagine that, you see your analytic numbers go through the roof when real Formula One drivers are using your game. And I'm sure it's opened up a door for you guys to get a lot of feedback from them on realism aspects of the game.
Yeah, massively so. I mean, just in reference to the esports side of things, we had a great esports program that's been building year on year. We've been creating some amazing talents. And it's a really exciting format. And then the pandemic happened, and obviously people were racing from home, and the format flipped, and then we had the drivers involved and celebrities involved, and the exposure for it went through the roof, because people were still craving Formula One, and they were able to see the likes of, you say, George Russell racing Alex Albon races, Charles Leclerc, and it was amazing. And I sat in on some of the warm-up races before it, and I just remember thinking, George is just on a next level to all the other drivers. I mean, most of them were able to jump in and get used to the game pretty quickly, but George was absolute next level. But as you say, one of the greatest things it opened up to us was we've always had good feedback from the teams and the drivers, but because during that period, quite a lot of them were twiddling their thumbs, they came to us and they said, look, why don't we book some time? We'll talk to you about what we find in the game, what we think you could change, what we think we can help you with. We were getting feedback from Formula One drivers through their bosses. We were getting feedback from their esports drivers. And we're obviously getting the community feedback that we always get. And when sort of the things started to ease and the sport went back into motion and people were traveling again, we thought we'll probably lose a little bit of that interaction, because they're so pressured flying around the world and always at racetracks or in hotels. And that's not the case. We're still getting those regular meetings, because they've realized how much fun it is to work with us on the game, how much they can help us, and how much we can help them with their esports programs. So I think we're now closer to working with the F1 teams and drivers than we ever have been, and they appreciate what we do with the game. I think, maybe 10 years ago, it was still educating them about video games and making a Formula One game. And now they see just how close it is to what they do, and how we create the game as well is very similar to how they obviously go about running their teams. And it's really given us that close relationship and a really strong feedback loop.
Speaking of in terms of with all the drivers coming on board, PJ, one of the keys I think also has been the tutorial development, certainly from your perspective. And what I discovered PJ when I just started playing F1, the F1 series. I was struggling, and you guys did a great job, amazing last year with the casual. Like, I hadn't driven a video game I've done a driving game in a long time, so I was struggling initially. And then you had the casual, and it kind of got me a little bit. And then I got into just did a YouTube search and found PJ's series, and then I found out that PJ does the videos for all the tracks for the series as well.
Track guides.
So that part was, to me, one of the most important things is that community that kind of brings you on board and kind of gets you up to speed. That's really important. So PJ, in terms of, I did want to ask you about your tutorial development in terms of kind of how you could have developed what you do for Codemasters, and then obviously what you do with your own series as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of something I've been thinking about for a couple of years, really, because I've grown up as an artist. I went to art college and I've studied like graphic design and a couple of other things like that. And I've always been somebody that wants to create things. And in a previous life with different games, like I was playing a trading card game way back when, and even back then I was, writing and creating content and got to work with that company for 5 or 6 years, which was great. And now I'm here with Codemasters. And again, I was thinking that I'm getting to the point now where I can't be a successful blogger anymore because the market has moved on. Everybody's on YouTube. Everybody is moved over to video, as it were. So it's a fun, and I'm finding YouTube as a fun and exciting hobby to learn because it's so dynamic and there's so many different skills and aspects involved. It's like not only like, video editing and graphic design and audio and all that, but stuff like analytics and psychology and like how do you convince people to watch for 4 minutes instead of for 2 minutes? How do you hook them in, that kind of thing? And how do you keep them engaged and become a better presenter and a better entertainer and stuff like that? And I tried like various different things on my channel for a long time. Like I tried just the standard, like copying, Jimmy Broadbent or Super GT or whoever, copying the top names and just, putting out gameplay and commentating over it. And, when you're a nobody, that doesn't work because nobody knows who you are, so they don't care. So you gotta leverage your audience in another way. And
build your brand.
I came back and I explored some other things, like for example, like should I make Photoshop tutorials? I ran into the same problem. Same audience. But then it was just a case of coming back and figuring out after like a lot of like self-reflection, what do I like doing? What am I good at? And what's nobody doing? So it all came back to sim racing and it came back to the F1 games and rally games as well, because I specialize in dirt rally as well as F1. In terms of games that I actually try to be good at, I try to really focus on being really good at dirt rally because I find rally to be such a unique challenge. But I have all this skill and experience from playing multiplayer for 20 years in Formula One. And I found that when I was searching for tips online, that I wasn't necessarily finding the information that I was looking for, but I knew that I had some things that I could share with other people, like share the things that helped me along the way or things that I found out or things that I learned on my own and then put them out that way. And the challenge then was in coming up with like, rather than just putting out a video and hoping for the best, can I plan this? Can I build like a mini like education program, as it were? And that's kind of and the pandemic gave me extra time to do that because I wasn't commuting every day. So I had like an extra 2 or 3 hours every evening and I love that. So it's like, I have time to actually sit down, drive, edit, think, write a script and all that kind of stuff. And the thing with the education plan was like, how do I do this? Is like, I think you got to do your basic settings stuff at the start. So it's like, how do you set up your wheel? How do you set up your controller? How do you set up the game, your AI, all that kind of stuff? So you can make a couple of videos on those. And then what's the most common things that people are searching for? And then I do my research and I find out lots of people are searching for traction control or their ABS or how to take the racing line or how to not get crashed into in an online lobby or something like that. Like,
good luck.
Do I have skills?
Don't join an online lobby with no damage. That's rule number 1. It's a crash up derby if there's no damage on.
Oh man. Best strategy is to just sit back, let everybody else take themselves out at turn 1, and then just weave your way through the wreck, and then you gain like 10 places every time.
Yep.
But the actual process of making the videos, like my tutorials for those on my channel, what I do is they tend to, like if I'm doing a full-on scripted tutorial, that'll probably take about 8 to 10 hours of work. So it's a case of I might need to do an hour or 2 of research on top of what I already know, and then maybe like 2 to 3 hours of a script, and then rewriting it, trying to cut it down, because when your first draft is probably like 3,000 words, so which is like a 15-minute video, and then YouTube people don't have the attention for that, or maybe they do, some don't, that kind of thing. And it's all in the analytics. At the end of the day, you can see exactly when people drop off, which is another interesting aspect. But you write the script, you review it, you do like a mock run of it, and then then what I do is I'm sitting in the rig or something like this, or over there at the desk, and I record the audio, put that in, and then after that I figure out like a capture list. So what are the things that I need to serve as I talk a lot. But you take your capture list is essentially what things do I need to capture to illustrate the things that I'm talking about. So for example, if I'm doing like a guide on traction control, I'm going to need footage of a car spinning out of a corner from putting the loud pedal down too loud. And essentially I'll go into the game and I'll record that, and then I'll write a whole list of these. There could be about 20 or 30 of them. And then once I've got all those, put those back in the edit. And then after that, it's you edit it, you put in a couple of graphics to make things a bit clearer if you can, and then go through all that. And then there's the publishing side of it after that. So it's like title, description, thumbnail, keywords, all that. And that's a whole different kettle of fish in terms of things to learn and things to get good at. And nobody's a master at it. It's really because it changes all the time. But it's not a case of simply sitting down, driving and talking, and then just letting it that be that. I've tried some of those, and you need to have everything kind of pre-rehearsed if you're going to do one of those kind of videos. And I've tried them for rally, and they kind of work, but they don't necessarily work for F1 as much, because F1 is such a dense and complicated sport with a lot of things to master. Yeah. But it's something that aspiring content creators out there don't necessarily think of. They think that the people at the top, or the people at the top of Twitch or whatever, they're essentially, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to hit record, and I'm going to make a load of money. It's not necessarily that way, and there's not a lot of money in it either. But it's a case of you're producing a show, you're producing a piece of content, and there's a lot of planning that goes behind that. Yep. And yeah, it's a fun hobby and a fun way to get into things like that. But the thing that I've come to find over the last year or so is, because I'm now making content on racing games, and specifically Cody's racing games, that it's starting to dovetail nicely into my actual day job. So, for example, last year F1 2020 played a big focus on tutorials and on education, because you had the new casual handling mode, you had a couple of easier things to ease people into the game. The handling model had improved based on feedback from the drivers. It was much easier to drive without assists and that kind of thing. And I was making tutorials on my own channel and planning tutorials and all that kind of stuff. And through talking to the rest of the social team and so on, it was like, is there a way that I can do this officially as well? Like, do some extra videos on the official channel that maybe go a little bit even more beginner friendly than what mine do, because mine still talk about some esoteric things that you wouldn't really talk about on the brand channel. Yeah. But like really nitty gritty technical stuff. But if you want to keep it like super basic, you can still do that on the official channel. And I figured a way to do it, and ended up doing, how many videos did I make last year? I think I made about 100 or 150. It was crazy. That's like across, because like I've got my channel, and I was doing the F1 channel stuff for all the tutorials for the tracks and for some of the features, like all of the assists or the safety car and a couple other things. And I was also doing dirt rally stuff at the same time. And yeah, it all came together, and it's a nice blend where I have like my personal play space, which is, you know, my YouTube and my Twitch and stuff like that. But if anything good comes out of that, I have the opportunity to do things with Codemasters on official channels that has more meaningful impact on people, and like for access to bigger and better resources and a bigger audience and stuff like that, which ultimately helps more people get into the games and enjoy them more.
Yeah. Right. The traction control thing, I was like, how are these people are full of it. They're not turning their traction control off at first. I couldn't get out of turn 1 at Austria without spinning the car. But then I just stuck with it and kept watching the videos, and I'm like, okay, now I drive without assist, which was like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm driving Bahrain into that turn and not locking up every time now. You know,
turn 10, isn't it? It's Bahrain turn 10 downhill, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a bear. Oh my god, that turn is a bear.
Yeah,
that turn kills everybody.
Yeah,
I mean, why? It's downhill and you're losing the grip because the car is falling away.
Yeah, and if you want to take it, you got to brake way earlier than you think, and you go, okay, should I go to 7th gear here? If I just stay in 6th and just kind of ream it out a little bit, I'll be in better shape. And there's a lot of trial and error. And by the way, the other thing that you showed, I remember watching your Abu Dhabi video because I love running that track, and I'm going, how are these guys, just watching guys do hot laps or races there, how are they not getting track limited every time? And then you've cracked the code for me because you showed it, and you said, well, when your front tire is over the line, your back tire is not. And you showed the reverse view. So you always had at least one tire that was not violating track limits.
There
and I'm
go.
like, that's it.
4 wheels off the track. If you only have 3 wheels off the track, you're still on the track, right?
Yeah. But it was like, to use the Oprah Winfrey term, it was such an aha moment. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? I never thought to hit my reverse camera to see if my rear wheels were still on it.
Yeah, or watch your replays. Go back and look at it from the...
Yeah, I was like, geez, that was such that was a huge moment to get more out of the track for me. Let me ask you about this, because Nico Rosberg puts out the videos, too, with the game. And Nico's polarizing, right? He's critical, but he's Nico Rosberg. And the fact that he's doing it, like, I watch his videos, and he's so compelling to me, right? Because of everything that went down in 2016 and over the years, what happened in Spain years ago with him and Lewis, and they took each other out of that race, eventually for Max to win his first in 2016. But seeing guys like Nico Rosberg, who is an F1 champion driver, having fun with the game and using his celebrity to be a part of it is just awesome to me. To relate that to people, it would be like, an elite level, like Sidney Crosby doing that with the NHL 2021 game. So what's that like for you to see that?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? Seeing, I think in some ways it's also a bit of a flip of what fame is these days, or what somebody is successful at. So it's like Nico would have taken a very traditional approach to working his way through the formulas, becoming Formula One world champion. And now he's moving into a different space. Whereas there's those who are coming through the sim racing space and then moving into real motorsport. So now I think the opportunities are there in both directions. But to see somebody who is essentially absolute pinnacle in their sport, then pivot into doing things in the way he's now with his YouTube channel, and also he's available in the game as one of our characters. We've had him in the game in the past as well. It's really exciting to see people engaging with something that maybe traditionally they wouldn't have been so interested in. I think the fact that the game is so popular now, and the fact that they've seen it featured on the Sky Sports F1 channel. When we did the esports, that was on TV, in the UK. That gives it an even broader audience. So people who might not traditionally watch it on YouTube or watch it on Twitch will have seen it on the actual official Formula One channel. And that suddenly gives it so much credibility. And then you see Nico Rosberg playing the game and Nico talking about the game. Yeah. And that's like, well, if it's good enough for a Formula One world champion, then there's got to be something there for me as well.
Lee, I got to obviously Formula One F1 2021 is coming out July 13th in the digital deluxe edition, and standard edition coming out on July 16th. So for our audience, what are some of the new things they can look forward to in this year's edition?
Yeah, so probably the biggest headline feature for F1 2021 is the story mode Breaking Point. So this is a first for us. Back in 2019, we sort of dipped our toe in the water with the F2 feeder series. So if you played that was a short story element that brought you into Formula 2 before moving into Formula 1. And from there, we thought, well, let's do something really spectacular. And it's taken us the 2 years to build up to do this. And that's where Breaking Point comes in F1 2021. So you start out in Formula 2. You progress from Formula 2 into Formula 1 in the 2020 season before moving into the 21 season. And it's a linear story. Very inspired by Drive to Survive, but ironically we started work on it before Drive to Survive became the huge success it is. But you'll certainly notice some nods to certain episodes of Drive to Survive through the story. It's very character driven. It's it's a total departure from really what the rest of the game gives the players. So we've always said that if you're playing Driver Career or you're playing My Team, you're building your own story, your own journey, and you're sort of picturing it in your head, and you're sort of joining the dots. Whereas if you're playing Breaking Point, we're filling in all those gaps between. You're seeing the discussions with the team boss. You're seeing how the older character, Casper Ackerman's dealing with his demons in the background. You know, he's not sure if he's quick enough to still be in the sport. He's getting paranoid about his young teammate getting potentially a higher salary than him without him knowing, or getting the better parts for the car. You know, you'll see the relationship he has with his wife and the other drivers in the paddock. And of course, the return of Devon Butler, who was the antagonist in F1 2019's feeder series. We brought Devon back because we achieved exactly what we set out to do with Devon. When we cast the actor to play the part, we wanted somebody who you really wanted to slap and you wouldn't like. And we achieved it perfectly. We thought, well, we're not too bad at this. You know, we make a good racing game, but we're getting quite good with the character stuff as well. So that's why we brought Devon back. And obviously we had professional writers as well who wrote this story for us. So, yeah, it's a bit of a departure for us. So a totally new element to the game, bringing, again, a different audience, but also feedback we get regularly from our really hardcore players, you know, the guys who do the 100% races. Sometimes they want something different. Sometimes they want a little bit of a break and something still in the world of Formula One, but with a different twist. So that's the biggest headline feature, personally, for me this year. But then something which maybe you guys might engage with is we've got a two-player career. So the career is such a loved game mode, and I can't wait to see people play it with their friends. And it might be a case of, you know, maybe you guys race together and you'll decide to team up at the same team and go to become Constructors Champions, or you'll take the contract route. One of you will race for Ferrari, maybe, one for Red Bull, and then maybe your paths might cross, you'll join the same team later on. But ultimately, you know, it's taking part in the very, very successful career mode that we have in the game, but with a friend. And I think that's something that's really exciting because it's a great mode to progress through anyway. There's so many cool things to engage with, developing the car, the rivalries, meet the press, all of those things that are part of that game mode, but shared with a friend. So I think those are two of the really cool things that we've added to the game this year. And as you mentioned, Nico Rosberg, and if you order the deluxe edition of the game, which comes out a few days earlier, Nico is one of the iconic drivers that you'll be able to place in your My Team as your teammate. So again, that's looking at some of the history of the sport. There's been some fantastic drivers, and we've always said, you know, who wouldn't want to be driving alongside Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher? You know, those are greats that if you could sign them to your team, you would in a heartbeat, and that's something you'll be able to do in 21.
Will Nico Rosberg throw a Pirelli hat at me if he's in second place? It's one of the great moments.
If only we'd been able to motion capture that.
It's one of the great moments. PJ, what's it like? Because there's going to be new tracks along the way eventually here as well, added to F1 2021. And going forward, you guys have to deal with this all the time, learning the new tracks to get those tutorials out, because I'm going to need them. I'm going to need help at Imola in turn one, so I don't go off the path like or pushed off the path like Lewis did this year. But what's that going to be like to kind of find all the speed and every element of those new circuits for people to be able to play them here coming up very soon?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of this season because the calendar is constantly shifting. It's been changing this week, last week. It's been changing. Tracks coming in, tracks going out, tracks coming back in again, like Turkey and stuff like that. But you've got coming up post-launch, once everything is all good to go, you've got Imola, you've got Portimao, which was Portugal, and you got the all-new Jeddah Street Circuit, which is in Saudi Arabia at the end of the season. So those are all interesting challenges for different reasons. And if any of your viewers or listeners out there have played other racing games, like, for example, another game that I can riff off here is Project Cars 3, for example, which is the latest from our sister studio, Slightly Mad Studios. They make the Project Cars games. Those two tracks are already in there, so people can get there and get a sense for the layout. They even have a fictional Formula One style car, and they have the 2019 Indy cars as well, which are great fun to drive. So that's a good way to get a benchmark now, maybe like weeks, months, however long it is in advance before it comes out. But then the actual process of learning a new track is something that's quite interesting, because you have some tools in the game, but you should also be using tools outside of the game as well, because the tools in the game are good, but they're built for everybody, and you might need more tailored feedback. So, for example, a way that I would learn a track, and I had to sort of relearn all the tracks for 2020 in order to drive them faster, and also to drive them with a wheel for the first time, because I was a controller player up until F1 2020 essentially, and I only really started on wheel then. But 20 years of pad experience helps, so it helps get me up to speed on the wheel. But it's a case of in-game you've got things like the racing line assist, so this draws a colored line on the road. So it'll be either green, or it'll be green when you've got full throttle, when you're on the gas, and then it'll be red when you hit the brakes. And it tells you exactly where to place your car. In a slightly conservative thing, it might brake like 5 or 10 meters before a pro player would brake, but it's there to get you around the track safely. And in F1 2021, you're going to have colorblind options for that racing line as well, actually.
Great.
So, for example, depending on the form of blindness you have, whether it's red-green or whether it's one of the other forms, it's the color of the racing line will change, and it'll be easier to see. So that's another thing to have. That's another thing to have in your toolkit. But one thing that I find really useful for not necessarily learning the initial layout, but then once you get the layout and then you get up to speed, is to do time trials. So time trial is essentially like qualifying, with infinite laps and a car that doesn't break and so on and so forth. And with that, you can set any other person in the world who has set a time on the leaderboard, you can set them as your rival, and that then puts their ghost lap on the that puts their
telemetry
ghost back, and you follow straight on.
Yeah.
So one thing I like to do for that, and I like to do it in a lot of games, I call it ladder climbing. So what you do is you go out, you set your best time you can, and then you come back into the garage, and then you go to the leaderboard and you look for somebody that's maybe, I don't know, a half a second or a second faster than you. I use it a lot in rally in particular, more so than F1. But it's a case of you find somebody that's slightly faster than you that you can chase, but you don't want to set Jarno Opmeer straight away, because he's F1 Esports world champion at the moment, and he's crazy fast. He'll be, by turn 3, you won't see his ghost. He's already gone. He's gone. He's putting videos up on YouTube where he's beating the AI at 110% in the rain, one-handed, while chugging a beer with the other hand or something like that.
On slicks. He's a freak.
He is still winning. It's crazy how quick he is. But if you pick somebody that's slightly quicker than you, then they kind of serve the function of a pace car. So they're there almost like a driving instructor, because you can still see them maybe about 50 or 100 meters ahead of you. And then you can be like, oh yeah, they actually go really wide into this turn, or oh, they actually keep 3 wheels on the track here and they don't get a track limits penalty. And they're getting out of the corner much quicker than I am here. So maybe if I put the throttle down a little bit earlier, I can actually, oh, that works. Oh yeah, and then I shift up very, very shortly. And you can combine that then with external resources as well, like tutorials on YouTube, or even just hot laps from the pro players from their specific camera angle. Like, that's a great thing to look at when you're watching F1 Esports, for example. You'll watch these pro players and the camera will switch to their onboards, and you can see exactly, like from the same view that you have, exactly where they're going and what their inputs are, because sometimes their inputs are on the screen as well, showing you like, oh, he's on 50% throttle through turn 3 here, and that must be because he's trying to get a better exit and he gets faster speed and all sorts, and it all comes together. But yeah, the to kind of tie this up in a neat little bow, in terms of learning new tracks, if there's existing games out there where those tracks are already there, that's a good way to get a head start on the layout. You can also, if they've raced there in real life, like 2 of the tracks that you mentioned have already been raced at this season in Formula 1, you can watch the Real Sports pole position laps. You can see the line that Max Verstappen takes through turn 1 at Imola, or that Lewis Hamilton takes through the uppy downy section in Portimao, and use that as reference as well, so that you can have that. You can have that, write down a couple of things, and then go try them out in the game and see if you can actually make it stick. And then on top of that, then you have time trial with your ghosts, and you've got the racing line assist if you ever need a helping hand and stuff like that. But it's always a fun experience to learn a new track. So it's and some are easier than others, I'll tell you that. We were talking before about Abu Dhabi, and when I made that track guide that I made on my channel, I have I did a hot lap at the very end of it, where I'm narrating while I'm driving it. I have about 50 outtakes of me talking halfway through the lap, and then I come out of turn 7, I put this, I've spun it. And I've got a whole bunch of those in a reel somewhere. If I make a clips channel at some point, I've got to upload some of them.
Gag reel. I love it.
And then Lee, you have, of course, every time we turn around, we have, now Abu Dhabi's completely changing their track at the end of the season. You're like, we just did this, and now, but this is part of life in developing tracks for Formula One.
It is. It's something we're quite accustomed to. I mean, there's been a number of times we've actually created circuits that didn't exist at that time in real life. I mean, one of the ones that always made me laugh was when we did Texas. There was footage of, I think it was David Coulthard driving a Red Bull over the dirt that was going to be one of the hills. And we were like, that gives us some idea of the scale of the undulation that we're going to be building, because at that point we were still in the early stages of building that circuit as they were in real life. But we obviously finished ours before the real one was completed. And we had the same with circuits such as Korea in the past as well. In India, they were both, unfinished circuits when we built them in the game. So we're quite accustomed to that. And with the ever-changing calendar this year, I'm going to shamelessly plug another feature in the game, to be honest now, because we've got a new feature in there called the Real Season Start. Now, Real Season Start allows us to insert the results from the ongoing season. So if I choose to start at Monaco, I can pick up where one of the drivers is at that point in the season and inherit their points and their team's points, and I can start my season there. So for tracks like Turkey, for example, we don't have Turkey in the game, but we can insert the results from the Turkey race. So if you join the season after Turkey, you can still have the results that actually applied at that race. So that's made the game really versatile this year with an ever-changing calendar.
Oh, that's really cool. All right, last thing, and we'll let you guys get on your way because this has been fascinating. And I want to go around the horn here, and I want each of you, including Anthony as well, and I'm going to answer this as well. Favorite track to drive, least favorite track to drive in F1 2020. And maybe this will change in F1 2020. This changes for me all the time. I was on a Belgium kick forever at Spa, and now I'm like, I don't even want to go. I don't want to deal with Belgium. But okay, so let's start with Ant. Ant, favorite track to drive currently, least favorite.
Favorite track to drive on right now is, and it's one of my favorite tracks in real life too, is Baku, Azerbaijan. It has to me just the right level of challenge and difficulty level, especially when you get around where the castle wall's at, especially when you get everybody cramming up around that area. That's probably my favorite track. Least favorite, that gives me absolute cold sweats every time I think about it. It's a toss-up, probably, despite the beautiful, locale. Monaco, it's a tie between probably Monaco and Singapore to give me absolute cold shivers. Monaco probably the most.
Yeah,
I used to love Singapore way back when I was playing F1 2010.
Singapore has just been it's been a bear for me. It's cool, but I have some reason and I wonder, because again, I am a controller player, and I am actually, Lee, I own a PlayStation 5, so I am actually really, really excited to see what you guys have planned with the controller. I know you've mentioned the additional force feedback and everything for this year. So
we've got the new triggers. Yeah, definitely. You can really feel what the car's doing beneath you. They really load up. I can't believe how much feel they've managed to get into such a a very fine element as those triggers. So yeah, you can really feel what the grip's doing when you're braking and accelerating. Yeah, they're really nicely implemented in the game.
Lee, as a guy who works on the development of all these tracks, your perspective here is going to be fascinating. Favorite track to drive, least favorite track right now?
I mean, I'm going to be quite predictable, I think, with the first one. You mentioned Spa. And Spa has probably been my favorite track for years and years and years. It's not changed. I can do lap after lap after lap on Spa. It's got a special place in my heart, even more so because I did go over there and do a track day at Spa. I spent an entire day just thrashing my car around Spa, and it was as exciting in real life as it is in the game. And also, it was one of my most memorable moments with working with the drivers. We went out there and we filmed with Lewis Hamilton at Spa in 2010, and we were there with McLaren, and that's just, the whole thing was special. So Spa's got memories for me, but it's also probably my most enjoyed circuit in the game.
What about your least?
See, this is
you love all your
be,
kids the same, right?
Exactly.
I pull no punches with this one. There is a circuit that I can't get on with, and I don't know why. And I've never been able to get a decent lap. I just struggle. It's a strange one. Some people really love it. I don't like Hungary.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. There's something
Hungary's on my list as well.
Yeah, I just can't get into a rhythm. There's something maybe about this sort of. It's the first few corners are great. The very fast left is great, and then you get the right. And from that point on, I fall to pieces. I just can't string the lap together from that point on. I don't know why.
The one thing I don't like about Hungary is the fact that on the inside line, on a couple of important turns, there's not rumble strips. There is a flat-out curb. and you cannot, if your wheels touch it, you are dead. You are spinning. So that is one thing. I do like that one, though, as well. But PJ, favorite track?
Yeah, well, let's just continue on with the Hungary thing, because Hungary's also my toughest track to get a hang of as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to further illustrate, like, it's similar to I really love, like, Sector 1 is great. You slam on the brakes into turn 1, you get on the throttle early, you try to manage the wheel spin, get into this long downhill turn 2, turn 3, and then flat out, and how brave can you be into the quick left-hander? And then after that, my lap falls apart. I get to the chicane, and it's just a little bit too tight for you to take fast.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, because it's really, you got to jink it in, you got to jink it that way, and then you have your whole Sector 2 thing, which is all corner after corner after corner after corner, and it's, if you're not hooked up for the first corner, you've compromised your line for the next one, and it's a domino effect after that. So then you're compromised for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's the kind of track that if you're in a car that's well drilled together, like, for example, you've gone through my team, you've done about 5 or 6 seasons, your car is basically a rocket ship, and it'll just slide through those corners really easily. But when you've got my team season 1 car, which is bottom of the grid, and the chassis feels so poor compared to a Mercedes or something like that, it's really painful to drive around places that require that precision, which is really tough. But
all right, it's a favorite track.
Yeah, there we go. I was waiting for that. My favorite track to drive is Monza, because I do love me some Spa. I love me some Suzuka. Love me some Melbourne, actually. Melbourne I really got into in F1 2020. Really good momentum. You could swing it around. It's absolutely great. But Monza has always been my beginner one. And when I used to have a tradition where every time I got a new F1 game, first thing I do, Monza, Ferrari, cockpit camera, 4 laps, 5 laps, or whatever it is. Just go. Just feel it, because it almost feels like a home circuit in that way. Because if I was recommending a track for somebody to learn an F1 game on, I think Monza would actually be the first one, because it's very simple. You've essentially, the track map says you've got I think 11 corners, something like that, right? But realistically, when you think about it, you've got 6. You've got first chicane, second chicane, Lesmo 1 and 2, you've got Ascari, and then you've got Parabolica. So you've got 6 sections, and you've got a lap time of like 1 minute and 20 seconds. So it's really easy to drill that into your memory. It's not like Singapore, for example, where it's like, is this turn 18 or 19? And then you still don't know where you're at. Because Singapore doesn't give you...
Yes.
And the thing with Monza, with the long straights as well, is that you have time to think and you have time to breathe. You don't have that at Monaco. You don't have that at Singapore.
Yeah,
because
set up your corner.
The corners at Monaco and Singapore are not necessarily that challenging on their own, but it's the fact that you're going bang, 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 one after the other, and you don't have time to relax in between them to, get your senses together again. You're still panicking about the last corner by the time you're breaking into the next one. That kind of thing. It's really tough.
Good
and
point.
It's absolutely insane that they can do that for like 2 hours in real life in like 50 degrees Celsius heat, and it's like absolutely insane. But with Monza, for example, you've got it. I find, like I said, it's a great place for somebody to learn, because you really learn how to brake when you're going into the Monza chicane. It's like, brake at 100, okay, I made it. Brake at 50, nope. break at 150. Okay, I'm too slow. But then you'll get that sense of that, and you'll build that knowledge base, and you'll figure out, what do I look out for? What am I looking out for here? There's a sign up there. I can go for that. Oh, somebody's knocked out the 100-meter board. Right. What do I look for next? What's my secondary reference? Like, oh, the Pirelli sign. If I cross just under it, that's pretty much the breaking point. So you nail it, and it helps you become a better driver that way. And then it's just a fun place to race on. Whenever you go to the multiplayer lobbies, I mean, there's memes about turn 1 Monza, because it is the biggest breaking point. It is absolute chaos if you're in a lobby with people that are struggling to keep up with that. But if you survive that, you can get some really good battles, because you have that time to think and time to strategize in between. You've time to plan your next move, and you've got the big braking zones. Who's the bravest? Who's going to get in there? That kind of thing. So that's why Monza always comes back to me. And also, it just looks great. You're just blasting through trees, and
it's just so much speed. It's awesome. Yeah, Monza was my initial one, but my two favorite. Right now I'm on a France kick. I have no idea why. Ever since the race at Paul Ricard, just mastering some of those late turns and late apexes, to me is one that I'm running a ton of right now.
More fun in the game than real life.
I think you're right. And then the one that probably, I mean, Monaco's of course going to be there, but for some reason, there's just some tracks, like, you just go, I just don't know why I can get it. I just can't get into this specific circuit. And there's one that I just can't. I don't know why. It just doesn't resonate with me, and I don't understand why. But Australia is one that hasn't hit me at times, and it seems like that's always in the lobby, because it's the first one that shows up when you create an open lobby. That's one of them. But the other one for me is probably Japan. I love elements of it, and Spain is one too. Like the S section is so technical, but I don't know. I digress. But it changes all the time for me. I'll probably be in love with Spain in a couple of days. Mexico is one I like driving a lot too, but that stadium section is so difficult, so slow. But anyway,
so
yeah. Guys, this was awesome. Lee, PJ, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it. Everybody, check out the F1 2020 game again. The extended edition comes out on July 13th. The standard edition comes out on July 16th. I have already got mine purchased. Thanks for doing this, guys. We appreciate it, and we'll be following along on YouTube and all the other various outlets that you guys are putting out great content on. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely, thanks for having us. It's been great to chat with you guys. Absolutely, that's absolutely great. 4 different perspectives on Formula One, like from working on it to being new fans to being old fans to being all sorts. It's been great.
Thanks to Lee Mather and to PJ Tierney for joining us on this episode of the Stick to F1 podcast. We'll be back with another brand new one, Austrian Grand Prix wrap-up special to kind of put a bow on the 3 straight races, the sandwich races. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time on the Stick to F1 podcast.